Your four favorites are Back to the Future Part 2, Little Shop of Horrors, Being John Malkovich, and Nirvana the Band, the Show, the Movie. You have two time travel movies in your favorites, so starting off with an obvious one, you didn't have Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure marked as watch. Like Back to the Future 2, it's a time travel comedy that came out in 1989. It may not be a musical like Little Shop of Horrors, but music is a big part of the plot. Like Being John Malkovich, it involves a magical portal that grants people access to something, and then people start exploiting it and things get out of hand. And like Nirvana the Band, it's a movie about a couple of best friends who want to start a band and end up with the ability to time travel. Speaking of comedies that involve music, Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping isn't sci-fi, but it is a mockumentary like Nirvana the Band. And the way it depicts childhood friends starting a band and one of them gaining fame as a solo act reminds me of the third act of Nirvana the Band, the Show, the Movie. Another musical mockumentary I think you'd enjoy is This Is Spinal Tap. Rap World is also a mockumentary about a couple of friends trying to make music together like Nirvana the Band, and it's set in 2009, which is only 1 year shy of the year that they traveled to in Nirvana the Band, the Show, the Movie. Groundhog Day plays with the concept of time like Back to the Future and involves characters having to repeat certain scenarios like Nirvana the Band. Like Little Shop of Horrors, Bill Murray's in it. And like Being John Malkovich, it's an absurd comedy that explores philosophical and existential ideas. Galaxy Quest is sci-fi and there's a time travel component to the story. Like Being John Malkovich, there's this whole idea of performance because the characters are actors. Like Nirvana the Band, the characters end up in a situation where they're like, there is no way this could possibly be real. And like Little Shop, it involves fame and is a comedy with an ensemble cast. Beetlejuice, like Back to the Future 2, involves characters moving between realities. Except in Back to the Future, it's the past, present, and future, and in Beetlejuice, it's the afterlife and the land of the living. The plants in Little Shop of Horrors remind me of some of the visuals in this film. Winona Ryder's one of the stars, and she has a cameo in Being John Malkovich. And like Nirvana the Band, it's got this chaotic comedic energy. Idiocracy takes place in the future, like Back to the Future 2, and both films depict the future in a way that mocks consumerism and stupidity with a lot of fake advertisements. Like Little Shop of Horrors, it has this cartoonish comedic quality despite dabbling in some darker ideas. Like Being John Malkovich, it plays with the concept of identity. And like Nirvana the Band, the protagonist is desperately trying to go back to the time they were living in before they ended up in the future. Speaking of movies with lots of fake advertisements, I also want to recommend Josie and the Pussycats. It may not be sci-fi, but it uses a fictional technology to satirize consumerism. It involves music and fame like Little Shop of Horrors. Like Being John Malkovich, it involves entering someone else's mind, albeit in starkly different ways. And like Nirvana the Band, it involves friends who are in a band and a sudden rise to fame. Top Secret is an action comedy from the 80s like Back to the Future 2. It involves music and fame like Little Shop of Horrors and Nirvana the Band. And like Being John Malkovich, the characters end up in some absurd situations. Dick, like Back to the Future 2, reimagines a period of history by inserting ordinary teenagers into the story. Like Little Shop of Horrors, the protagonists are naive and end up in situations where they're in over their heads. Like Being John Malkovich, it finds humor in regular people suddenly gaining access to famous or powerful figures. And like Nirvana the Band, it's a buddy comedy about two friends whose shenanigans alter real-world events. The Mask has the cartoon logic of Little Shop of Horrors. Like Being John Malkovich, it involves a fantasy mechanism that allows someone to basically become someone else in some sort of way. Like Nirvana the Band, it's got a lot of physical comedy. Oh, and like Being John Malkovich, Cameron Diaz is in it. Mind Game involves time travel like Back to the Future 2 and Nirvana the Band. Like Little Shop of Horrors, it starts off with a protagonist who's kind of this stereotypical loser with a crush on a girl. And like Being John Malkovich, it's got absurd humor, existential themes, and plays with the concept of identity and consciousness. Since Little Shop of Horrors is a horror comedy musical, I want to recommend Phantom of the Paradise. And the protagonist is a singer-songwriter like Jay in Nirvana the Band. But a couple other horror comedy musicals you might enjoy are The Rocky Horror Picture Show and The Happiness of the Katakuri's. Wayne's World is a buddy comedy involving music like Nirvana the Band. I feel like I shouldn't recommend this one because you're clearly a Matt Johnson fan and had all his films marked as watch, and he hates this movie. But I think The Truman Show fits the vibe of your four favorites. Like Back to the Future 2, it's got this constructed version of reality that feels artificial. Like Little Shop of Horrors, it explores the notion of fame and involves an ordinary guy becoming a celebrity of sorts. Like Being John Malkovich, it's an existential comedy about performance and identity. And like Nirvana the Band, everything is being recorded. Nirvana the Band is a mockumentary and Matt and Jay have cameras following them around. And Truman is unknowingly the star of a 24/7 reality TV broadcast. If you love the hidden camera comedy aspect of Nirvana the Band, I think you might enjoy Bad Trip. The Blues Brothers is a musical comedy like Little Shop of Horrors about a couple of guys in a band like Nirvana the Band, but it's also got a sense of action and adventure like Back to the Future 2. And like Little Shop of Horrors, John Candy is in it and so is one of the Belushi brothers. Plus the director of Little Shop of Horrors has a small role in this movie. And as a bonus, I don't know if you'd like either of these movies, but there are two movies referenced in Nirvana the Band Band the Show the movie that you didn't have marked as watched that I think make the movie even funnier if you've seen them, and those are The Butterfly Effect and The Hangover.